Mine will be a little briefer than the last two, but thank you for having me all here today. You're familiar with some of the flooding issues we've had up on Otterdale Road and so forth. So that was one of our big concerns when looking at this case was some of the flooding issues potentially downstream. So I'll get to that last or second. But we have more stringent requirements in the Upper Swift Creek watershed. And some of the standard requirements we have within our ordinance, and we like to remind folks when they're developing the Upper Swift Creek watershed, is the enhanced erosion and sediment control requirements. So one of the things we ask for is super silt fence, which is basically a step up from the standard silt fence or an equivalent to that. We also require 25% larger sediment basins during construction. So Gloria, getting to your point that during the construction activities, we require those basins to be 25% larger than they would on a standard project. We also require or ask for, during construction, for areas that are denuded to use an anionic PAM. It basically holds the sediment in place, or for those areas to be covered with a flexible growth medium, such as a hydro seed with wood fibers in it, so that it decreases the amount of sediment runoff during construction. So those are some of the things that are in our proffers. As I was mentioning, related to the flooding downstream, you're familiar with the culverts being upgraded on Otterdale Road. And those are being designed to deal for the 100-year storm event. There are already properties out there that have floodplain recorded on them, and we want to make sure that any development occurring is not impacting those floodplain limits or, potentially increasing them. Also, any downstream facilities, such as culverts under smaller roads or stormwater facilities, we don't want those to be overtaken by anything less than the 100-year storm. So we're making sure that whatever gets built on this site is not going to impact those downstream properties where we have the 100-year floodplain recorded or the culverts aren't designed to handle the amount of flow coming downstream. So those are some of the things that we're concerned with. Also, that whole area of the county and most of Chesterfield County has highly erodible soils. So on the steep slopes where you have a slope greater than 20%, we don't want any impact to those or development on those. And in the event that the development will have to impact those, such as a road crossing or something like that, we'll need to see more protective measures in those areas so that we don't have increased runoff and erosion. So those are some of the things that we saw from the start during this case and from what we've dealt with in the past in that part of the county. One thing I would like to mention related to the stormwater concerns is that over the last 20 years, we've had more protective measures in that watershed, and water quality in the reservoir is still good, even from the housing boom in the mid-2000s and the most recent housing boom we've had in that part of the county. So the water quality is still good in the reservoir. We have a very healthy ecosystem within the reservoir. So the measures that have been put in place many years ago are working. And so I think there's some comfort that, those things are effective.
Mr. Sloan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Scott, and if these are already included in the Upper Swift Creek ordinances, I don't have them all out of my head. So if they are, just feel free to let me know. Why would we not see any proffered conditions in this case, like we have with quite a few that have come from the private sector that basically say the developer needs to ensure that any post-development runoff does not exceed pre-development runoff? And if there is, what are the mandated mitigation requirements that we would want to see? What are we looking at from a BMP standpoint? I bring that up because we're taking a heavily forested area and potentially getting rid of a lot of the old established trees and ground cover and creating significantly more runoff.
Right, so that's a good question because we do have those in a lot of specific cases where we know that, particularly in an infill development where, we have a piece of property that wasn't developed and we've got adjacent neighborhoods that are already built, and we want to make sure that, what is coming off of that site doesn't overtax or overcome older neighborhoods that were built under lesser standards. So here we've kind of done that, and that gets to the this point right here on the protection of downstream properties. So as you mentioned, a lot of times we may ask for a proffer that basically says the 100-year post-development runoff will not exceed the 100-year pre-development runoff. And so we're kind of asking for that here. It's just a little more general and broadcasting, so to speak. So we don't have a specific area right now that we know we're going to be draining to an older area. Most of these areas are newly developed, so they have higher standards for the stormwater runoff and the culvert designs. But if we come across an area during the design stage that doesn't have those adequate facilities, it's got to meet that 100-year requirement. Okay. So that kind of gets at your question.
Right, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, or if I'm getting this turned around backwards. But do you feel that the 100-year storm measure is adequate given the significant rain events we've had during shorter time periods? Because I want to say we worked on a case together where up at Iron Bridge, where we looked at a shorter time period to account for the really big significant rains that we've had in recent time periods.
So the 100-year storm event is pretty much our most stringent that we have required.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Mr. Chair,
That's right.
thank you for being here. And one of the questions I had is, will there be a master plan for the total acreage that requires one large stormwater management facility, or will there be multiple stormwater management facilities as development occurs?
Because of the way this watershed is kind of bisected by the streams running through it, I don't think one large basin would be able to cover it all. Now, you may be able to have a few larger basins, but I think that remains to be seen based on who is recruited or who is pulled in, so to speak.
So as the wetlands and the floodplains, all that's delineated, and the developable areas are defined, would that put your department in the position of being able to estimate or predict the number that would be needed, or how do we know, conceptually even, if there is a master plan for how all that property is going to work together when it's developed?
Ideally, for the EDA to produce a large overall stormwater master plan, it will be better for them from a marketing standpoint to have that all addressed for anybody that they are trying to recruit to the site. One of the things that still needs to be submitted, as Mr. Hart alluded to, as they're going through their environmental analysis, and I've noted it here, is a natural resource inventory report, which includes all of the resource protection areas, the wetlands, and a few other features. That has to be turned in as part of the zoning process before you all vote on the case. And they're working on getting that to us.
And when you receive that, would that enable you to determine or what the kind of design, how would it be What would it look like? How would it function? How would it operate? Would they be dry ponds, wet ponds? Would they be amenitized, or should they be? Or would you be in a position to make any kind of prediction about that?
We would probably have more of an idea of what wouldn't work in some locations, because some of the locations, if you've got wetlands close by, high water table, it's going to be more difficult to have a wet pond there. It's also going to be tougher to have a dry pond, a detention facility in those locations. So that will narrow down some of their options in those areas and direct their path, so to speak, on what could be built out there.
And so your approach at this point is to set the standards that any stormwater management facility would have to operate or function within.
Well, those
within
are
those
already
standards.
set out, so to speak. We have a ordinance related to the Upper Swift Creek watershed. Residential properties have to meet either a .22 standard for phosphorus removal or the new stormwater, well, they're not really new anymore. They're 7 years old now, from 2014. But basically, the engineer has to run both calculations. Whichever one is more stringent is the one they have to use. And then on the commercial side, the new stormwater standards are more stringent than what was in place before. So that's even more protective of the reservoir. So they will have to do those calculations and see, where those play out. But as for that overall stormwater master plan, that's probably not going to come about until you get a better idea of what's going to be coming in and, how large of a tract of land they will take up.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Dr. Hilton.
So it really has become apparent to me kind of what I think the public is really having an issue with, right? A lot of what we're talking about now, we usually talk about behind closed doors with developers, right? And so we're usually talking about stormwater, we're talking about environmental issues, we're talking about traffic and all this, right? And I think that as a county, since this is a county project, right, the county has really been transparent about where we are with different areas of the project, right? And so it's a little bit of how does this case compare to other cases, right? And I think that because the county is an applicant, and Andy, if you want to jump in, please feel free, and any other staff members. But we usually have these kind of conversations behind closed doors in our development meetings and with the different departments, right? And now we're kind of having those conversations now in public, and it might not look like we have it all together, right? Because there's some things that we still have to go back and look and analyze and do some more research, right? I think that's kind of what we're all asking our questions about. But a lot of times when we have a case come before us, it's already laid out, if you will, a little bit more firm than where we are right now. So do you think that some of that is maybe where the concern is coming from? Because when I hear a school, a fire station, jobs coming to the area, I get excited. But this is kind of one of those situations where the Board of Supervisors invoked this plan, rightfully so, because they saw that the area is growing and the need for these public amenities are in great need and will be in even greater need in the future. So we're just having some conversation based on the project in public that ordinarily with another developer we would have had maybe more private. Is that the elephant in the room that I'm maybe calling out?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Sloan.
Dr. Hilton, I think that when we're working with the development community on smaller residential cases, those cases spend months, if not a year, working with the staff, working through the nuances of all of these issues. And staff, they go through multiple TRC meetings. You know, the different departments spend weeks, months working with the developer because they've got specific site plans, they know exactly what's going to go on the site, those types of things. I can say, and Commissioner Fry can step in, but when I think of cases like the Matoaka mega site, cases involving Dominion Power and landfill issues and Carvana and the water park. This body has spent. Sorry, Scott. This body has had numerous. How many work sessions did we have on the water park? 6.
Yeah.
6 and numerous community meetings. So this is the only opportunity for us as a commission to look at a case together in its entirety, because and that's you know, so we hear from citizens their concerns, and so I mean, I believe where we are is there's been an initial set of proffers, you know, that have been drafted. Like in all these other cases, there's been an initial set. So now it's up to this body. And I've received very specific instructions. While the board maybe initiated this, it is absolutely up to this body to make sure that that we do our due diligence and make sure this case is the very best it can possibly be before it advances beyond this body.
Right, rightfully so. But I kind of want to just point that out, that I think that some of the comments are very specific, but we don't really have very specific answers just yet. Just as the types of industries that will come in, we don't know some of that information. So we have to zone it right, and then what we do, well, after we zone it right, then we'll go out and recruit those businesses that would fit the profile for where we're trying to go with the zoning. And so there are some unknowns in the case. So if you look at maybe even like Courthouse Landing or some of the other cases that have come before us that were very controversial, we knew some of the types of uses that were going to be there, and we could predict them. We might not know the actual business names that were coming per se. Well, we knew we were going to have a hotel. We knew we were going to have restaurants. We knew we were going to have multifamily, townhouses, that sort of thing. I think where we are with citizens right now is we're saying we don't know what we're going to get, but here's a profile of businesses that we're trying to attract, right? And so I think that's a heartburn for some citizens, because they feel like we should have, and I said this at our last planning commission meeting, they feel like we should have the business and then we should do the rezoning. But we can't do that, because what we have to do is do the rezoning and then go attract those businesses. Because the zoning process, as you alluded to, Commissioner Salone, is that the planning process to get it zoned the right way is too long for the business to wait. They're going to go to another locality, and we won't have the opportunity. The train would have left the station. We would have never had the opportunity to board because we never had our ticket. What we're doing now is going to get us the ticket that we need to bring those jobs to the locality that we love very dearly, Chesterfield County, right? So that's really a different type of development project, and really what the citizens are having, when I read some of the comments, what they're having a hard time understanding. We know that depending on where a locality, where a business will go on the site, will kind of help steer the environmental piece of it, right? Depending on what type of business it is, it's going to tell the stormwater drainage and where the wastewater goes and that sort of thing, where they go on the map, on the plat. I think that's really, we really don't know, because we have to zone it right first, and then we have to trust our departments and our staff to walk us through that process after it's zoned. That's my point.
I kind of understand what you're saying, Mr. Hilton. I remember reading a story on the internet a couple years ago, and it's a true story because I read it on the internet. But this was actually legit. There's two gentlemen who lived in Great Britain who wanted to go visit Sydney. And they found a really great deal on the internet that was $200 a ticket to Sydney. So they buy their ticket, they board the plane, and they end up in Sydney, Canada. So I think what we're doing here is we're trying not to be those two guys in Great Britain. We're trying to make sure that the ticket we're buying to make this trip to Sydney, Australia is actually the trip to Sydney, Australia. So I understand what you're saying here, and there is some concept behind the we build it and they will come, but if we build it, we have to make sure it is built right. And I think we're going through the right process to make sure, if this does go through, that it is the right thing, and we've done the right things. The things that Mr. Smedley's doing here today are telling us the standards that we're looking for and the things we're doing here. We got a couple other questions that need to come up, but I think we're making sure we buy the right ticket to the right Sydney, is what I think we're doing.
Right, totally agree.
Yeah.
We're in line.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, just to add on to that, the way I'm looking at our case is that we are, as Commissioner Sloan raised earlier, we're looking for the performance standards. We're building a box of this is the zoning. This is what's required. These are the conditions that are going to address the impacts and the issues that have been identified by our staff and by the citizens. And so what we're looking for now is developing those conditions that will mitigate those issues and make the best case we can. So we're building a box, and that's the way I'm looking at it, and looking to staff to help us build the best attractive box we can that addresses these issues that have been raised.
Exactly.
I do think one of the things we're trying to do from a staff standpoint is not make that box too constrictive up front, too. It's a balancing act. And the idea that we've been leaning towards is trying, upon entitlement, to come forward with a master site plan an actual master plan, conceptual master plan for the entire 1,700 acres and for the 700 acres, so that we would still develop those design standards even after the zoning case comes through. We'd spend the time, we could get some public involvement in that. We could work towards getting those design standards to go along with the zoning, and until those design standards are completed in the next 3 to 9 months or whatever, nobody can build anything out there. That would be the general direction that staff's trying to see if that will be acceptable to you all, to see if we can kind of do it in those steps, because we do need to get the entitlement first in this, so they can start recruiting and going after grant funds and so forth. And we have the luxury of the county owning it, so it's not, as Mr. Hart mentioned earlier, they're not gonna sell it just to the highest bidder just because the highest bidder comes in. They're gonna really wait and see what developers can come in and actually provide jobs and provide a quality long-term product here. And so that's the direction I think we're trying to move with having the master plans in both of these projects, the east and the west, so that we could kind of keep this moving forward. And I know it's a little different than we normally do, but it is county owned, so it's a little different situation.
I have actually a question in two parts. One of them is going to be for you, and one of them is going to be for utilities. One of the things having to do with an environmental part of this is there's a couple of these industries here that could include potential runoff and things that happen from the product that could cause leaching into the soil and so forth. A lot of the homes that surround this area run off of well water and drinking water. And so I'm wondering what type of studies would need to be done to look at each one of these industries to see how they would behave in that environment and what they would give off.
Well, we would take those on a case-by-case basis. We don't have regulatory authority over, wells, but typically, as part of the, our environmental engineering department, we get asked about those type of questions. You might remember some similar cases recently.
Yes.
So we would look at those on a case-by-case basis. If there were any constituents of concern being stored or manufactured on site, that we would want to have, additional buffers or protective measures in place.
Fellow commissioners, we're coming up on the 5 o'clock mark. Do we want to continue this for about 15 extra minutes and then we'll suspend this and talk about what to do our next steps? Does that work for everyone? Okay.
All right. Ms. Fry, I will add that at the Minneville Technology Park, there was a stormwater master plan there, and that has worked very well as, you know, subsequent industries came in, businesses came in. So it's obviously in the EDA's benefit to design that from the start.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Sloan?
So I've mentioned a couple times where we're calling for somewhat limited perimeter buffering, and the belief is that the existing trees can remain. Again, you and I have had many lively debates about having the necessity from a drainage standpoint to strip clear, sites for whatever reason, for drainage and things like that. And I know this is maybe somewhat rhetorical, but you can't provide an assurance that buffer areas can remain, all the buffer areas can remain wooded, can you?
Smaller buffers have a harder time with, live trees.
Okay.
So obviously, the larger an area of forested area is, more likely to survive.